On Thanksgiving, my wife's sister stopped me at the front entrance and said, "You're not invited, go home." Behind her, I saw my wife's ex-husband, even my wife's high school lover laughing around the table. I just nodded, got back in my car, and made one quick phone call. 20 minutes later, my phone blew up, and the screaming started. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror that Thanksgiving morning, smoothing down the collar of my navy button-down. The one Elise always said brought out my eyes. Funny how I still cared about that, even after everything that had gone down between us these past few months. The shirt felt crisp against my skin, fresh from the iron, and for a moment I almost felt like the old me. The guy who used to believe that love could fix anything, that family dinners meant something more than just going through the motions. Downstairs in the kitchen, my homemade apple crumble sat cooling on the granite countertop, wrapped carefully in foil with those little crimped edges my mom taught me when I was 12. I'd gotten up at 6 a.m. to make the damn thing from scratch, peeling every apple by hand, mixing the brown sugar and cinnamon just the way Mara used to like it back when she actually pretended to tolerate me. The whole house smelled like autumn and better times, which was pretty ironic considering how everything was about to go to hell. I grabbed the bottle of Cabernet from the wine rack, a decent vintage, nothing too fancy, but not bottom-shelf garbage either. The kind of wine that says, "I'm making an effort," without screaming, "I'm trying too hard." That was always the tightrope walk with Elise's family. Too cheap, and they'd whisper about it for weeks. Too expensive, and suddenly I was showing off, or trying to buy their approval. There was no winning, but I kept playing their game anyway. Walking to my car, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach that came with every family gathering these days. Things between me and Elise had been rocky for months. Hell, who was I kidding? They'd been rocky for over a year. We barely talked anymore except about logistics. Who was picking up groceries? Whose turn it was to deal with the landscaping guy? Whether we were still going to her cousin's wedding in February. All the surface-level stuff that keeps a marriage looking functional from the outside, while everything important rots away underneath. But this was Thanksgiving. This was supposed to be different. This was family. And despite all the passive-aggressive comments and eye rolls and whispered conversations that stopped the moment I walked into a room, I still believed, God help me, I still believed that sitting around a table together meant something. That blood and history and shared memories could overcome whatever petty bullshit was poisoning the well between us. The drive to Mara's house took 23 minutes, and I spent every one of them rehearsing conversations in my head. Maybe I'd crack a joke about the Detroit Lions. Maybe I'd ask about her new job at the marketing firm. Maybe I'd just keep my mouth shut and let the wine do the talking. By the time I pulled into her driveway, the one with the perfectly manicured lawn and the seasonal wreath that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget, I'd almost convinced myself that today would be different. I walked up to that front door carrying my peace offerings like some kind of domestic diplomat. The crumble in one hand, the wine tucked under my arm, and what I hoped looked like a genuine smile plastered across my face. I could hear laughter coming from inside, the warm sound of people who were genuinely happy to be together. For just a second, my heart lifted. This was what I'd been missing. This was what I'd been fighting for. Then Mara opened the door. Her lips were already curved in that cruel little smirk that I'd learned to hate over the past 5 years of marriage. Not the kind of smile that reaches your eyes or makes you feel welcome. The kind that says, "I know something you don't, and I'm about to enjoy this way too much." She was wearing some expensive-looking sweater that probably came from one of those boutiques downtown where they act like they're doing you a favor by letting you spend $300 on cashmere. "You're not invited," she said, flat as roadkill. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that I'd been part of this family for half a decade. Just those 4 words delivered like she was telling me the weather forecast. Go home. But it wasn't her words that hit me like a punch to the gut. It was what I saw behind her, through the doorway that led into her dining room with its farmhouse table and Pinterest-perfect fall decorations. There was my wife, my Elise. The woman I'd promised to love and honor and cherish till death do us part. She was sitting there in her burgundy dress, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, and she was smiling. Not the forced, polite smile she'd been giving me for months. A real smile. The kind she used to save just for me. And she wasn't alone. On one side of her sat Garrett, her ex-husband. The guy she'd supposedly gotten over years before we met, the one she claimed was ancient history. He had his arm draped casually across the back of her chair like he owned the place, like the past 5 years of our marriage had just been some weird intermission in their real love story. On her other side, and this was the part that made my vision go a little fuzzy around the edges, sat Troy Halden, her high school boyfriend. The one she'd told me 1,000 times was just a friend whenever his name came up in conversation. He was pouring wine into her glass like he'd done it 1,000,000 times before, like he belonged there, like this was exactly where he was supposed to be on Thanksgiving. And they were all laughing. Not polite dinner party laughter or awkward family gathering chuckles. Real, genuine, belly-deep laughter. The kind that comes from inside jokes and shared memories and the comfortable intimacy of people who know each other's stories by heart. They were laughing at me. I could feel it in my bones, the way you know when you're the punchline of a joke you're not in on. Standing there in the doorway with my homemade dessert and my carefully chosen wine, I finally understood what I'd been too stupid or too hopeful or too goddamn naive to see before. This wasn't about a bad marriage or family drama or holiday stress. This was about me being erased. I said nothing. What was there to say, really? That I was hurt? That I felt betrayed? That standing there watching my wife cozy up to two guys from her past while her sister delivered the news that I wasn't welcome at my own family's Thanksgiving felt like getting kicked in the chest by a horse. None of that would have mattered to Mara. She was getting exactly what she wanted. Me gone, humiliated, put in my place once and for all. So I just nodded. Like I understood. Like this made perfect sense. Like I'd been expecting it all along instead of spending the morning making goddamn apple crumble and picking out wine that wouldn't give them anything else to criticize me about. I turned around and walked away from that door, down those perfect porch steps, across that magazine cover lawn that probably got more attention and care than I'd gotten from my wife in the past year. My feet felt heavy, like I was walking through wet cement, and that stupid crumble was still warm against my chest where I clutched it like some kind of security blanket. The November air hit my face sharp and cold, but I barely felt it. Everything seemed muffled and distant, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart in slow motion. Behind me, I could still hear their laughter drifting through the windows. Louder now, if anything. Like my leaving was the best part of their whole damn day. I made it to my car, my sensible Honda Civic that Elise always complained wasn't impressive enough, wasn't the right image for a successful business owner like me, and sat there in the driver's seat with the engine off. The foil around the crumble crinkled as I set it carefully on the passenger seat, and for some reason that small sound almost broke me. All that work, all that hope, all that stupid faith that things could get better if I just tried hard enough. The silence in the car was deafening. No radio, no engine noise, just me and the wreckage of what I'd thought was my life. I could see my reflection in the rearview mirror. Shirt collar still perfectly pressed, hair still combed, looking like a guy who had his shit together. Looking like a lie. That's when it hit me. Not sadness, not heartbreak, not even anger. Something colder and cleaner than all of that. Clarity. They thought this was the end of the story. They thought I'd slink home with my tail between my legs, lick my wounds, maybe send some pathetic texts begging for another chance or demanding an explanation I'd never get. They thought I was the kind of guy who'd take this lying down, who'd let them rewrite history and pretend I was never part of the picture. They were wrong. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Alton Reyes, my attorney. The guy who'd handled the legal side of my business for the past 3 years, who'd helped me navigate contracts and partnerships and all the boring paperwork that keeps a company running. More importantly, the guy who'd been warning me for months that I needed to protect myself better, legally speaking. The guy I'd been ignoring because I was too busy playing the devoted husband to listen. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice came through the speaker. "Hey there, stranger. How's Thanksgiving treating you? Start the process," I said, cutting straight through the pleasantries. There was a pause. Alton knew me well enough to know I didn't make dramatic statements lightly. We'd worked together long enough that he could probably hear something different in my voice, something that hadn't been there before. "You sure about this?" he asked, and I could picture him sitting up straighter, maybe reaching for a legal pad to start taking notes. "We've talked about this scenario, but once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. You understand that, right?" I looked back toward Mara's house, where warm light spilled out of the windows and my wife was probably telling stories about the good old days with her ex-husband and her high school sweetheart, where I'd been erased so completely that it was like I'd never existed at all. They think I'm a joke, I said, and my voice sounded calmer than I felt. Steady. Sure. Let's show them what the punchline costs. Alton was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, I could hear him shifting into lawyer mode. All right then. I'll need you to come in first thing Monday morning. Bring all your financial documents, business records, everything we talked about. And listen, don't contact Elise directly. Don't respond to any calls or texts from her or her family. Let me handle all communication from here on out. Done. And one more thing, he said, and there was something almost like admiration in his voice. Happy Thanksgiving. I hung up the phone and started the engine. As I pulled away from that perfect suburban street with its perfect houses full of perfect families, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. I wasn't just walking away from a dinner. I was walking toward something else entirely. Something they'd never see coming. I was barely 20 minutes into the drive home when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. At first, I ignored it. Alton had told me not to respond to any communication from Elise or her family, and I was already learning to appreciate the wisdom of following good legal advice. But curiosity got the better of me at a red light, and I glanced down at the screen. 3 missed calls, 7 unread texts, and counting. The first text was from Elise, sent just 12 minutes after I'd left Mara's driveway. What did you do? No honey, or babe, or any of the pet names she used to throw around when she was trying to smooth over our fights. Just those 4 words, sharp and demanding, like I was some employee who'd screwed up a client presentation. Like she had every right to answers, and I had no right to privacy or boundaries or my own goddamn life. The second text came from Mara 2 minutes later. You can't be serious. Oh, but I could. I was dead serious for the first time in years, maybe the first time since I'd met Elise and started bending myself into whatever shape she needed me to be. But Mara wouldn't understand that. In her world, I was supposed to be grateful for scraps, thankful for whatever minimal acceptance her family decided to throw my way. Then came the third one, and this one actually made me laugh out loud, a bitter sound that echoed off the car windows. It was from Garrett, Elise's ex-husband, the guy who'd been sitting in my wife's dining room like he owned the place. You're petty as hell. Petty. That's what he thought this was. Some kind of childish tantrum because I didn't get invited to their little reunion dinner. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. They thought I was just some hurt husband sulking his way home to eat leftover takeout and maybe send a few angry texts that they could all screenshot and laugh about later. I smiled and leaned back in the driver's seat, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine amusement. Not the fake laughter I'd been forcing at dinner parties and family gatherings, but real satisfaction. The kind that comes from knowing something other people don't, from holding cards they can't see. Because while they were sitting around that table cutting me out of their lives, Alton had been busy. My attorney didn't mess around when I gave him the green light on something. He'd already filed the emergency motion to freeze our joint assets. Every single account that had both our names on it, every piece of property we'd accumulated during our marriage, every business asset that we technically owned together. The house where Elise was probably planning to bring her ex-husband and her high school boyfriend for private little gatherings. Under legal scrutiny now. The BMW she'd insisted we lease because it looked better in client meetings. Frozen. The business checking accounts she'd been treating like her personal piggy bank. Locked down tighter than Fort Knox. But here's the thing that really made me smile. The part that Elise had either forgotten or never really understood in the first place. We weren't just married. We were business partners. Co-owners of 2 successful event planning firms that had taken me 5 years to build from nothing into something actually profitable. My name was on everything. The business licenses, the vendor contracts, the intellectual property agreements, the software subscriptions that kept everything running. I'd been the one doing the grunt work while she played the charming face of the company, schmoozing clients and taking credit for events I'd planned down to the last detail. She'd gotten so comfortable thinking of herself as the boss, as the real power behind our success, that she'd forgotten who actually held the legal keys to the kingdom. She'd started making decisions without consulting me, signing contracts with my electronic signature, telling people she was the CEO while introducing me as her business partner, like I was some junior associate instead of the guy who'd built the whole damn thing. Well, Now she was about to get a very expensive education in the difference between being the face of a company and actually owning it. My phone buzzed again. Then again. The texts were coming faster now, and I could practically feel the panic radiating through the screen. They were starting to realize that this wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about power. And for the first time in our relationship, I was the one holding it. But this wasn't just about money, and it sure as hell wasn't just about business assets or frozen bank accounts or legal paperwork. Those were just the tools I was using to fight back. The real war had started weeks ago, maybe months ago, and I'd been too stupid or too trusting or too goddamn hopeful to see it coming until it was almost too late. This was about trust, about the fundamental belief that the person you marry, the person you build a life with, the person you wake up next to every morning for 5 years, has your back when the world gets ugly. I'd believed that right up until 3 weeks ago, when I finally stopped making excuses for all the little signs that had been piling up like storm clouds on the horizon. It started with the late-night texts. Elise had always been glued to her phone. Part of the business, she said, clients needing last-minute changes, vendors confirming deliveries, the usual chaos that comes with planning other people's perfect days. But lately, she'd been taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered, sleeping with it under her pillow instead of on the nightstand, stepping out onto the back porch to take calls that used to happen right in front of me. Then came the laughter. Not the kind we used to share over stupid YouTube videos or inside jokes from our early dating days. This was different, secretive, intimate, the kind of laughter that happens when someone makes you feel special in a way you'd forgotten was possible. I'd catch her giggling at her screen while I was making dinner, and when I'd ask what was so funny, she'd just say nothing and put the phone face down on the counter. The locked screens were what finally broke through my willful blindness. Elise had never been paranoid about her phone before. I knew her passcode. She knew mine. We were married, for Christ's sake. We shared everything. But suddenly she was angling her body away from me when she typed, clearing her throat loudly if I walked up behind her while she was scrolling, making sure I couldn't see what she was looking at. That's when I remembered something I probably should have forgotten years ago, her old iCloud password. The one she'd used for everything back when we were dating, before she'd updated her security settings and started compartmentalizing her digital life. It was stupid of me to even try it, a violation of privacy that would have made me feel like garbage under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the password still worked. The first message I found was from Garrett, sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when Elise had told me she was too tired to talk and went to bed early. Glad we're finally doing holidays like we used to. Feels like old times, doesn't it? Old times. Like the 5 years of our marriage had just been some weird detour, some temporary arrangement that was finally coming to an end so the real adults could get back to their real relationships. But it was the message from Troy that really made my blood run cold. Troy Halden, her high school boyfriend, the guy she'd sworn was ancient history, just a friend from the old neighborhood who she'd run into at the grocery store a few months back. Can't believe your husband still thinks this is his house. Guy's more clueless than I thought. How long are you going to keep pretending? Keep pretending. Like our entire marriage was some elaborate act she'd been putting on for my benefit. Like every morning coffee, every dinner conversation, every "I love you" before bed had been part of some long con that was finally reaching its endgame. I scrolled through weeks of messages, each one a small knife twist in my chest. Plans for dinners I wasn't invited to. Jokes about how oblivious I was. Conversations about after the divorce, like it was already a done deal, like I was just too stupid to realize I'd been voted off the island. The worst part wasn't even the cheating, though that cut deep enough. It was the timeline. Based on the messages, Elise had been planning to cut me out for months. Way before any of our recent fights, before the tension that had been building between us, before I'd given her any real reason to want out besides the simple fact that she was bored with me. Thanksgiving wasn't just some spontaneous family gathering where I happened to not be welcome. It was her victory lap, her chance to parade her ex-husband and her high school boyfriend around like trophies while I showed up with homemade dessert and wine, playing the devoted husband right up until the moment she slammed the door in my face. But here's what Elise and her little reunion tour didn't know. I had my own finale planned. And unlike theirs, mine was going to have some serious teeth. Within an hour of my call to Alton, the first domino fell. And when that domino hit the ground, it made one hell of a beautiful sound. I was sitting in my living room, in my house, surrounded by furniture we'd picked out together back when we actually meant something, when I got the notification on my phone. Elise's credit card had been declined at some fancy wine shop downtown, probably trying to buy another bottle of that expensive Pinot Noir she liked to serve when she wanted to impress people. The kind that cost more than most folks spend on groceries in a week. Declined. Insufficient funds. Account frozen pending legal review. 20 minutes later, another notification. The vacation home in Aspen. The one she'd insisted we needed for business retreats and client entertainment. The one that was really just her personal playground for weekend trips with whatever friend group she was trying to impress that month, had been locked down by court order. Nobody gets in or out without legal authorization. The joint business accounts were next. Every checking account, every savings account, every investment account that had both our names on the paperwork. Flagged for suspicious activity, frozen pending investigation, all transactions suspended until further notice. The legal equivalent of a nuclear bomb going off in the middle of our financial life. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was what Alton had done with our business relationships. See, here's something Elise had conveniently forgotten during all her planning and scheming with Garrett and Troy. I might have let her play the role of charming frontwoman, but I was the one who actually owned the business. My name was on the original licensing paperwork. My signature was on the vendor contracts. My social security number was attached to the business tax ID. Most importantly, I was the registered owner of the brand name and all the proprietary software tools that made our event planning company actually function. The customer relationship management system, the vendor database, the scheduling software, the invoicing programs, all of it was licensed under my name, paid for with accounts I controlled. Alton had sent official notices to every single one of our vendors and clients that afternoon. Professional, legal documents that basically said, please be advised that as of this date, my name is no longer associated with Elise's version of the company name. Furthermore, my name is the sole licensed owner of all business software, client databases, and proprietary systems previously used by said company. Any future use of these systems without written authorization constitutes intellectual property theft. Translation: if Elise wanted to keep running the business, she'd have to start from scratch. No client list, no vendor relationships, no software systems, no nothing. Just her charm and whatever she could build with her bare hands. Good luck with that. My phone started ringing around 7 p.m. Elise's name flashing on the screen, probably calling from Mara's house where she was still playing happy family with her ex-husband and her high school boyfriend. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Then Mara called. Then Elise's mother, sweet old Mrs. Patterson, who'd always treated me like the son she never had, who probably had no idea what her daughter had been planning. Then Garrett had the balls to call me directly, like we were buddies who needed to work something out. I let every single call go to voicemail. By the fourth call, Elise finally left a message. And let me tell you, it was a masterpiece. Gone was the sweet, reasonable woman who'd been playing loving wife for the past few months. This was the real Elise, the one who came out when she didn't get her way, when someone had the audacity to fight back instead of rolling over and playing dead. You ruined everything, you vindictive little. The message cut off there, probably because she'd run out of breath from screaming. Or maybe because someone at Mara's house had the sense to take the phone away from her before she said something that could be used against her in court. Too late for that, though. I was already recording everything. Click. Later that night, around 10:30, when I was finally starting to feel human again after a hot shower and a decent meal that didn't involve begging for scraps at someone else's table, my phone rang with a number I actually recognized. Jonas Mitchell, Elise's accountant. Well, technically our accountant, since I was the one who'd been paying his bills for the past 3 years. Jonas was one of those soft-spoken, careful guys who wore wire-rimmed glasses and always had his shirts pressed just so. The kind of accountant who dotted every I and crossed every T, who sent quarterly reports that actually made sense, who never got flustered even when tax season turned into complete chaos. I'd always liked him, actually. He seemed like the rare professional who actually gave a damn about his clients instead of just billing hours. Is there any way to reverse this? He asked without even saying hello first. His voice sounded strained, like he'd been fielding phone calls all evening from people who suddenly couldn't access money they thought belonged to them. We didn't know you had ownership of the software. That made me pause. Jonas was supposed to be handling the financial side of our business operations. He was the guy who filed our quarterly reports, who managed our business accounts, who should have known exactly who owned what in our little corporate empire. If he didn't know I controlled the software licensing, then somebody had been keeping him in the dark on purpose. You didn't know a lot of things, I said, settling back into my favorite chair with a beer that tasted better than any drink I'd had in months. Like the prenup? Dead silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that tells you everything you need to know before the other person even opens their mouth. You signed it. Not me, Jonas said finally, and I could practically hear him flipping through papers, probably looking for documents that would prove I was lying or mistaken or just plain crazy. But I wasn't any of those things. I was just a guy who'd finally stopped trusting his wife's version of reality and started paying attention to the actual facts. Jonas went quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had that careful, professional tone that accountants use when they're about to deliver very bad news. There's something you need to know. About 6 months ago, Elise brought me an amendment to your prenup. Said you'd both agreed to some changes, that it was just updating a few clauses to reflect your current business situation. 6 months ago, right around the time she'd started taking her phone into the bathroom, right around the time the late-night texts had started, right around the time she'd begun planning her little Thanksgiving reunion with all the important men in her life, except me. I have the paperwork here, Jonas continued. Your signature is on it. But if you're telling me you never signed it, I'm telling you I never even saw it, I said. What kind of changes are we talking about? More paper shuffling. Then Jonas cleared his throat in that way people do when they're about to drop a bomb. Significant changes to asset division in case of divorce. Under the amended agreement, Elise would retain control of all business operations and receive 70% of marital assets, with you keeping only personal property and any premarital assets. 70%. She tried to rewrite our entire financial future, giving herself the lion's share of everything we'd built together, and she'd done it by forging my signature on legal documents. Not just cheating, actual fraud. Jonas, I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. I need you to make copies of everything related to that amendment. Every document, every piece of correspondence, every email. And I need you to do it tonight. Why? Because Alton Reyes is going to want to see all of it first thing Monday morning. We're not just talking about divorce anymore. We're talking about fraud, forgery, and God knows what else. Another long silence. Then, Jesus Christ. She really did this, didn't she? Yeah, Jonas. She really did. But here's the thing about fraud. It leaves a paper trail. And thanks to guys like Jonas who keep meticulous records, that paper trail was about to become Elise's worst nightmare. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was hot and messy and made you do stupid things. What I felt now was something much more dangerous. I was focused. Laser focused on making sure everyone who'd underestimated me learned exactly what that mistake was going to cost them. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd slept for the first time in months. No tossing and turning. No lying awake wondering what Elise was really thinking. No pretending I didn't notice her staying up late to text people she claimed were just clients. For the first time in I don't know how long, I'd slept the sleep of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Over my morning coffee, black, no sugar, the way I'd always preferred it before Elise convinced me that real coffee drinkers used cream. I fired up my laptop and made one simple change to our company website. Well, my company website now, legally speaking. Instead of the usual homepage with its glossy photos of perfect weddings and corporate events, visitors to the site now saw a single page with a simple message in clean, professional font, temporarily down, under new ownership. That was it. No explanation, no drama, no angry rants about betrayal or divorce or forged legal documents. Just a calm, business-like announcement that things were changing and everyone would need to adjust accordingly. By 10 a.m., Elise's social media accounts were exploding. I didn't follow her on Instagram or Facebook anymore. Hadn't for months, actually, ever since I got tired of seeing photos of girls' nights out that looked suspiciously like dates with men who weren't me. But I had friends who still followed her, and they were more than happy to keep me updated on the shitstorm that was brewing. Her Instagram DMs were flooded with questions from vendors who'd gotten Alton's legal notices, florists wanting to know if their contracts were still valid, caterers asking about payments for upcoming events, photographers wondering if they should still show up to weddings they'd been hired to cover. Her Facebook page was even worse. Clients who'd paid deposits for spring weddings were demanding answers. Brides-to-be who'd trusted her with the most important day of their lives were freaking out about whether their dream weddings were about to turn into disasters. The comments section looked like a support group for people who'd just discovered their wedding planner had vanished into thin air. Vendors started dropping her within hours. Not because they had anything personal against Elise, but because uncertainty is poison in the event planning business. When you're dealing with people's weddings and anniversaries and once-in-a-lifetime celebrations, you can't afford to work with someone whose business might not exist next week. Clients started pulling contracts by the dozen. Most of them had clauses that allowed them to cancel if the service provider underwent significant business changes or couldn't guarantee delivery of services. Having your business assets frozen and your partner file fraud charges definitely qualified as significant changes. But the real masterpiece came on Saturday. Elise had been planning this Christmas gala in Boston for months. Some high-end charity thing with a guest list full of local politicians and society types. The kind of event that was supposed to establish her as a serious player in the Boston event planning scene. She'd been bragging about it for weeks before everything went to hell, calling it her signature event, and acting like landing this gig proved she was ready to play in the big leagues. The venue was the Fairmont Copley Plaza. Beautiful old hotel, gorgeous ballroom. The kind of place that screams class and sophistication. Also the kind of place that costs a fortune to book and requires contracts signed months in advance. Here's the thing Elise had forgotten in all her planning. I owned that venue. Not directly, of course, but through a holding company I'd set up 3 years ago when I was diversifying our business investments. The same holding company that technically employed both of us, that held the licenses for our event planning software, that owned a bunch of properties Elise had always thought belonged to us when they actually belonged to me. I called the venue manager Saturday morning. Nice guy named Marcus who'd worked with us on several events over the years. Marcus, this is about the Christmas gala booking for next weekend, I said. I need to cancel it. Oh no, is everything okay? Elise seemed so excited about this event. Elise is no longer affiliated with our company. The booking was made under false pretenses. I understand. I'll take care of the cancellation immediately. That night, Elise went live on Instagram. Actually live-streamed herself crying in what looked like Mara's guest bedroom, mascara running down her cheeks, begging for sympathy from strangers on the internet. Talking about how her vindictive ex-husband was trying to destroy her career, how she was the victim of a malicious legal attack, how she just wanted to keep making people's dreams come true. It was pathetic, and it backfired spectacularly, because people remembered who had actually made their events successful. They remembered who had shown up at 5 a.m. to troubleshoot problems, who had stayed late to make sure every detail was perfect, who had built the relationships with vendors and venues that made the impossible happen on schedule and under budget. They remembered me. I served Elise the divorce papers on the Monday after Thanksgiving. Not because I was in any particular hurry. Hell, I'd waited 5 years to figure out who she really was. What was another few days? But because Alton said timing mattered in legal proceedings. Strike while the iron's hot, establish momentum. Show the court that this wasn't some knee-jerk reaction to a holiday argument, but a calculated response to months of deception and fraud. The papers were thick. Thicker than I'd expected when Alton first explained what we'd be filing. Petition for divorce, obviously, but also motions for asset protection, claims of fraud regarding the forged prenup amendment, requests for emergency injunctions, and about 15 other legal maneuvers that would make Elise's life a bureaucratic nightmare for the foreseeable future. I could have had them served by some random process server, some stranger in a cheap suit who'd hand her an envelope and disappear. But that felt impersonal, and this was anything but impersonal. This was the most personal thing I'd ever done in my life. So I decided to deliver them myself. I knew exactly where to find her. Not at our house, my house, legally speaking, because she'd been avoiding going home ever since her credit cards got frozen and she realized the locks had been changed as part of the asset protection order. She'd been crashing at Mara's place, playing the role of the wronged wife seeking shelter with family, while her cruel husband destroyed her life for no reason. It was a nice story. Too bad it wasn't true. I pulled into Mara's driveway at exactly 9 a.m., early enough to catch everyone before they scattered to whatever jobs or responsibilities they still had left. The same driveway where I'd parked 4 days earlier carrying homemade dessert and wine, still believing that family meant something. Different man, different mission. I walked up to that same front door and knocked. Professional, businesslike knocks. Nothing aggressive or dramatic, just the sound of someone who had official business to conduct. The door opened, and I found myself face to face with Troy Halden. Elise's high school boyfriend was standing there in boxers and a wrinkled t-shirt, looking like he'd just rolled out of bed. Or out of someone else's bed, more likely. His hair was all messed up, and he had that sleepy, satisfied look that comes from spending the night doing things that married women probably shouldn't be doing with guys who aren't their husbands. For just a second, seeing him there in his underwear answering the door like he owned the place, I felt that old familiar rage start to bubble up. The kind of anger that makes you want to say something cutting, something that would wipe that smug look off his face and remind him that he was messing with another man's wife. But then I remembered, she wasn't my wife anymore. Not in any way that mattered. The papers in my hand were about to make that official. "Morning, Troy," I said, calm as anything. Like running into my wife's lover at 9 a.m. on a Monday was the most normal thing in the world. He blinked at me, probably trying to figure out if I was there to start a fight or beg for my marriage back, or do something else pathetic and predictable. Hey," he said, clearly not sure how to handle a situation where the betrayed husband wasn't screaming or throwing punches. "Elise around?" I asked, holding up the manila envelope. "Got some paperwork for her." "Elise," he yelled over his shoulder, still standing in the doorway like some kind of half-naked security guard. "Your husband's here." My husband. Even he knew that was about to change. She appeared a minute later, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing one of those expensive yoga outfits that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. She looked smaller somehow, less polished than the woman who'd been sitting at Mara's dinner table laughing with her ex-husband just a few days earlier. "Elise," I said without any emotion, extending the envelope toward her. "You and I are officially done. Business, marriage, trust gone." She took the papers with shaking hands, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. She looked like someone who'd just realized that actions have consequences, that you can't just rewrite other people's lives to suit your convenience. "You blindsided me," she whispered, and there was something almost childlike in her voice. Like she genuinely couldn't understand how I'd had the audacity to respond to her betrayal with betrayal of my own. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," I said, and my voice stayed level, professional, final. "We're even now." That's when Troy decided to insert himself into a conversation that had nothing to do with him. He took a step forward, puffing out his chest like he was going to intimidate me or defend his new girlfriend's honor or some other ridiculous alpha male bullshit. I didn't even blink. "Stay out of this," I said, and something in my tone made him freeze mid-step. "This war is way above your ego." Weeks passed, and the legal machinery I'd set in motion kept grinding forward with the relentless efficiency that only the American court system can deliver when someone has really, truly screwed up. Every day brought new developments, new victories, new evidence that I'd been right to stop playing defense and start playing to win. The restraining order against Elise accessing my business accounts came through first. Not just a temporary freeze anymore, but a permanent injunction that would stay in place until all the fraud charges were resolved. Judge Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd apparently seen every kind of marital deception imaginable, had taken one look at the forged prenup amendment and the documentation of Elise's attempts to steal business assets, and basically told her legal team to sit down and shut up. "Mrs. Patterson," she'd said during the hearing I wasn't even required to attend, "your client's behavior demonstrates a pattern of deliberate deception that this court finds deeply troubling. The respondent's request for asset protection is not only reasonable, it's necessary." Boom. Game over. But the real satisfaction came when the asset division was finalized. 70% of the firm's assets came to me. Not because I was being vindictive or greedy, but because that's what happened when you tried to forge someone's signature on legal documents and got caught. Fraud has consequences, and one of those consequences is that judges stop believing anything you say about who deserves what. Elise got to keep her catering company, the little side business she'd started 2 years ago that specialized in intimate dinner parties and wine tastings. I could have fought for that too, probably could have won, but I wasn't interested in destroying everything she'd ever touched. I just wanted what was mine, and I wanted her to understand that stealing from me was the worst mistake she'd ever made. Without my systems and branding, though, her catering business died faster than a houseplant in a college dorm. Turns out that when your entire client base comes from referrals through your ex-husband's event planning company, losing access to that network is pretty much a death sentence. She tried to rebrand, tried to build new relationships with vendors, tried to convince her old clients that she was still the same person who'd made their events magical. But people in the event planning world talk to each other. Word gets around when someone's been caught forging legal documents and trying to steal their business partner's assets. Vendors don't want to work with someone who might not be able to pay them. Clients don't want to trust their special occasions to someone whose own life is falling apart in very public and dramatic ways. Within a month, Elise's catering company was basically dead in the water. Her ex-husband Garrett vanished around the same time. Funny how guys like that stick around when times are good, but disappear the second things get complicated. One day he was sitting at Mara's dinner table acting like he belonged there, and the next day his social media accounts were deleted and nobody seemed to know where he'd gone. Probably decided that getting involved in someone else's messy divorce wasn't worth whatever nostalgic feelings he'd been harboring about his ex-wife. Troy lasted a little longer, but not much. Her high school boyfriend hung around for maybe 6 weeks, playing the supportive new boyfriend role while Elise's world crumbled around her. But turns out that dating someone who's dealing with fraud charges and asset seizures and a very public business collapse isn't nearly as fun as reliving your teenage romance during happier times. By Valentine's Day, he'd moved back to Miami, citing work opportunities that everyone knew was code for "this chick is way too much drama." So there was Elise, sitting in the wreckage of the life she'd tried to steal from me, with nobody left to blame and nobody left to comfort her. As for me, I was discovering what it felt like to build something real instead of just trying to save something broken. Christmas came, and for the first time in years I didn't spend it walking on eggshells, trying to navigate family politics and pretending to enjoy conversations with people who barely tolerated my existence. Instead, I hosted a small dinner at my house, legally and emotionally mine now, with people who actually wanted to be there. Alton and his wife Sarah came over around 4. Sarah brought this incredible green bean casserole that tasted like actual food instead of the pretentious fusion nonsense Elise used to serve at her dinner parties. Alton had switched from lawyer mode to regular human being mode, telling stories about his kids and asking about my plans for expanding the business now that I didn't have to run every decision past someone who was actively working against me. My assistant Kayla showed up with her boyfriend Derek and a bottle of wine that actually cost less than $50. Kayla had been working for me for 2 years, handling client communications and vendor relationships with this quiet competence that I'd always appreciated but never really acknowledged until everything hit the fan. She was the one who'd fielded all the panic calls from vendors when the legal notices went out. She was the one who'd calmly explained to confused clients that their events were still happening, just under new management. She was the one who'd kept my business running while I was busy dismantling my marriage. "You seem different," she said while we were cleaning up after dinner. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I can finally breathe again." But the real surprise of the evening was Clara, my next-door neighbor. Clara Martinez, the woman who lived in the blue house with the gorgeous garden and the dog that barked at squirrels every morning at exactly 6:15. I'd been living next to her for 3 years and barely knew anything about her beyond the fact that she worked from home and always waved when she saw me getting my mail. She knocked on my door around 6, carrying this ceramic dish covered with a kitchen towel. "I made cornbread stuffing," she said with a shy smile that made me realize I'd never really looked at her before. "Thought you might want some real food for a change." Clara stayed for the rest of the evening, and I learned that she was a freelance graphic designer who'd moved to town after her own divorce 2 years earlier. She was funny in this quiet, observational way that made you want to hear what she'd say next. She asked thoughtful questions about my business and actually listened to the answers instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. And when she laughed at something Derek said about his job at the brewery, her whole face lit up in a way that made the room feel warmer. "This is nice," she said when everyone was getting ready to leave. "Feels like a real celebration instead of an obligation." Standing in my kitchen at the end of that evening, washing dishes and listening to the quiet sounds of my house settling around me, I realized something I probably should have figured out years earlier. I'd been trying so hard to save my marriage that I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually enjoy my life. No more pretending that bitter comments were just jokes. No more making excuses for someone who treated me like an inconvenience. No more walking into rooms and wondering who was talking about me behind my back. Just peace. Just the simple satisfaction of building something good with people who wanted to be part of it. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. Months later, when the legal dust had finally settled and the lawyers had moved on to destroying other people's lives for billable hours, when the gossip had died down and the event planning community had accepted the new reality of who owned what and who was working with whom, Elise sent me one last message. It came on a Tuesday afternoon in late March, when I was sitting in my office, the real office I'd rented downtown, not the spare bedroom I'd been working out of when I was still pretending our marriage was something worth saving. The space was mine, completely mine, decorated the way I wanted it decorated, filled with equipment I'd chosen and furniture that actually made sense for getting work done. The message was simple, just 7 words that showed up on my phone while I was reviewing vendor contracts for a corporate retreat in Vermont. "You win. I hope you're happy." I stared at those words for a long time, sitting there in my ergonomic chair that didn't have to match anyone else's aesthetic preferences, surrounded by the quiet hum of a business that was finally running the way I'd always known it could. 7 words that were supposed to make me feel guilty, or satisfied, or vindicated, or something. But they didn't make me feel any of those things. Because the truth was, I didn't win. Not in the way she meant it, anyway. This whole thing was never about winning or losing. Never about keeping score, or getting revenge, or proving who was smarter or stronger, or more deserving of happiness. I just stopped playing her game. For 5 years, I'd been trying to be the husband she wanted me to be. The guy who laughed at jokes that weren't funny, who pretended not to notice when she flirted with other men, who made excuses for her family's behavior and her friends' casual cruelty. I'd been playing by rules that were designed to make me lose, participating in a competition where the only way to win was to disappear completely and let her rewrite our story however she wanted. The moment I stopped playing that game, the moment I decided that my dignity was worth more than her approval, everything changed. Not because I was vindictive or cruel or even particularly clever, but because I finally remembered something I'd forgotten during all those years of trying to make an unworkable relationship work. I had value. My time had value. My effort had value. My loyalty had value. And I didn't have to give any of those things to people who didn't appreciate them or respect them or even acknowledge them. Sometimes, silence is the loudest reply. So I didn't respond to her message. Not because I was still angry or because I wanted to hurt her, but because there was nothing left to say. We'd said everything that mattered in court documents and legal filings and asset division paperwork. Everything else was just noise. This year, on Thanksgiving, almost exactly 12 months after that disaster at Mara's house that started this whole journey, I drove up to my new lake cabin in New Hampshire. I'd bought the place in February with some of the money from the business settlement, a small but comfortable retreat about 2 hours north of Boston, where the nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and the only sounds at night were owls and the gentle lapping of water against the dock. The cabin wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was big enough for one person who actually knew how to cook, and a living room with a stone fireplace that had probably been warming this same spot for 70 years. The previous owners had been an elderly couple who'd used it as a summer retreat, and they'd taken good care of it without trying to turn it into some kind of Instagram-worthy showcase. It was exactly what I needed. A place that belonged completely to me, where I could think and plan and just exist without having to consider anyone else's opinions or preferences or expectations. I lit a fire in the fireplace that afternoon, watching the flames catch and grow while the November wind rattled the windows. The wood was apple and oak, seasoned properly and burning clean, filling the room with the kind of warmth that comes from inside as much as from the fire itself. I ate dinner alone, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Roasted chicken with herbs from the garden I'd started behind the cabin. Mashed potatoes made the way my grandmother used to make them. Green beans that came from the farmer's market in town instead of some overpriced organic grocery store. Simple food, prepared well, eaten slowly while I watched the sun set over the lake. Peaceful. No drama waiting for me when I walked through the door. No tension thick enough to cut with a knife. No conversations that felt like negotiations where every word was a potential landmine. No one rolling their eyes at my jokes or sighing dramatically when I tried to contribute to discussions about plans or decisions or anything that actually mattered. No betrayal lurking under the surface, waiting for the right moment to destroy everything I'd worked to build. No one at the door telling me I didn't belong. After dinner, I sat on the porch with a beer in my phone, scrolling through pictures that Kayla had sent from the company Thanksgiving party. The business was thriving now, bigger and more successful than it had ever been when I was trying to run it as a partnership with someone who was actively working against me. We'd landed 3 major corporate accounts in the past month, and the holiday event bookings were already stretching into next year. Clara had sent me a text earlier that day, a picture of the apple pie she'd made for her own Thanksgiving dinner with her sister's family in Portland. "Thinking of you," the message said. "Hope you're having a peaceful day." Clara and I had been taking things slow, which was exactly what we both needed. Dinners once or twice a week, long walks around the neighborhood, conversations that felt easy and natural instead of like performances or tests. She understood what it meant to rebuild your life after someone you trusted decided you were disposable. She knew the value of taking time to remember who you were before you started trying to be who someone else needed you to be. "It's nice to meet someone who knows who they are," she told me a few weeks earlier while we were planting bulbs in her garden for next spring. Instead of someone who's still trying to figure out how to make other people happy. The lake was perfectly still that evening, reflecting the last light of the day like a mirror that showed the world exactly as it was instead of how someone thought it should be. I could hear a loon calling from somewhere across the water, that haunting sound that seems to come from another time entirely. Sitting there in the growing darkness, listening to the fire crackle behind me and the gentle sounds of the world settling into evening, I realized something that probably should have been obvious years earlier. I'd spent so much time trying to earn a place at tables where I wasn't wanted that I'd forgotten the most important truth of all. I never needed their table in the first place. I was always meant to build my own. And finally, that's exactly what I'd done. Not out of spite or revenge or some desperate need to prove I was better than the people who'd thrown me away, but because I'd remembered something essential about what it means to live a life that actually belongs to you. You don't have to accept other people's definitions of your worth. You don't have to play games where the rules are designed to make you lose. You don't have to stay in situations that require you to become smaller and smaller until there's nothing left of who you really are. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't deserve you and start building something better with people who do. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. And sometimes, when you stop trying so hard to save relationships that were never meant to be saved, you discover that the life you're supposed to be living was waiting for you all along.